Maps of money no one could see. It began with lines drawn not on parchment, but in the minds of the men who moved London's wealth. Invisible boundaries, hidden routes, pathways of credit and influence that shaped the city more profoundly than any physical road or river. These maps were never published, never officially acknowledged, yet they guided the flow of capital with astonishing precision. London was entering a moment of rapid transformation. Trade stretched across continents. Banks expanded their reach. New financial instruments blurred the lines between ownership, debt, and speculation. But beneath these visible currents flowed another world. One shaped not by cargo or coin, but by relationships, promises, and silent agreements. To understand how the city rose to global power, we must return to a time when money moved through channels the public could not see. At first, these maps formed naturally. Merchants trusted certain lenders. Lenders favored familiar clients. Networks grew within coffee houses, guild rooms, and riverfront taverns where introductions carried more weight than ledgers. Invisible routes of trust emerged, connecting people who shared ambition, risk, and opportunity. These connections became channels through which massive sums could move with nothing more than a handshake. The reveal began when financiers realized these informal pathways had become more powerful than the formal systems intended to regulate them. A single letter of recommendation could unlock credit across multiple institutions. A whispered assurance could ignite investment in distant ventures. Influence clustered in unexpected places, not marked by royal charters or public offices, but by private conversations and shared history. This hidden cartography of finance shaped London in ways few understood. It determined which merchants rose and which fell, which ventures thrived and which collapsed, which risks were embraced and which rejected. Yet, because the system was invisible, it carried tension. Those outside the networks felt shut out of opportunities. Those within feared their maps might be exposed, challenged, or disrupted. As these invisible routes expanded, so did their influence. Money moved faster, deals closed quicker. But with every unseen channel came a new question, whispered by those who sensed the shifting ground. Who truly controlled the flow of London's wealth? London was about to learn that power concentrated in hidden places carries a gravity all its own, and that even the most invisible maps can lead to conflict. The invisible maps that guided London's money grew more elaborate with each passing year. Networks that once connected only a few trusted partners expanded across the entire city, linking merchants, lenders, shipowner, insurers, and speculators into webs too complex for any one person to fully comprehend. These unseen routes formed a parallel system, faster than official channels, more flexible than royal mandates, and far more powerful than anyone dared admit publicly. As these networks deepened, the divide between insiders and outsiders widened. Those within the hidden circles moved with remarkable ease. Credit flowed to them based on reputation alone. Opportunities arrived through quiet introductions. They had access to ventures the broader market never even heard about. Meanwhile, those outside the network struggled to keep pace. They faced higher borrowing costs, slower negotiations, and greater scrutiny. To them, the city's financial world felt less like an open market and more like a maze designed to favor a select few. Tension began to rise as frustration simmered. Guild members complained that centuries of formal hierarchy meant little compared to a whisper in the right coffee house. Younger merchants found doors closed before they could even knock. Foreign traders, surprised by how opaque London systems seemed, questioned how a world empire could be run on unwritten rules. Yet the hidden networks continued to expand, strengthened by secrecy and reinforced through shared profit. Conflict sharpened when influential financiers began using these invisible routes to bypass traditional institutions altogether. They arranged loans privately, undermining the authority of established banks. They directed investment into ventures that faced public skepticism, relying on trust within their circles rather than formal approval. They traded risks and information at a speed old systems could not match. And with each maneuver, the center of power shifted further away from official oversight. This quiet redirection unsettled those tasked with maintaining order. Officials demanded clarity, but found little to grasp. Transactions left no obvious trail. Negotiations were conducted in private rooms. Agreements existed only in memory or coded correspondence. Regulators warned that such a system, no matter how efficient, was vulnerable to collapse if even one key connection failed. Their concerns, at first ignored, grew louder as the networks pushed deeper into uncharted territory. Suspicion spread through the city. Rival groups formed their own shadow networks to compete for influence. Alliances fractured over rumors of withheld information or hidden deals. Even long-standing relationships strained as individuals questioned whether their partners were offering opportunities or keeping the best ones concealed. The pressure intensified when a major investment failed, an unexpected collapse that sent shockwaves through the hidden routes. Because the channels were so intertwined, the failure echoed far beyond its origin, catching dozens of merchants off guard and threatening to unwind the delicate balance of trust that held the system together. London now stood on the brink of a confrontation born not from visible conflict, but from the weight of secrets long carried beneath the surface. The maps no one could see were becoming unstable, shifting in ways that threatened the entire financial landscape. And soon, the city would face the consequences of allowing so much power to flow through channels that existed beyond the sight of those meant to oversee them. The shock of the failed investment rippled through London's invisible networks with a force no one had anticipated. Those who had relied on private assurances now found themselves exposed. Those who had extended credit based on quiet reputations watched their confidence evaporate. In a system built on secrecy, clarity became impossible. No one knew how far the damage spread or which connections might fail next. The unseen maps that once guided fortunes now resembled fault lines. Merchants who had thrived on the hidden routes suddenly questioned every handshake, every whispered recommendation. Some demanded explanations from partners who had none to offer. Others scrambled to distance themselves from the collapse, severing ties that had been carefully maintained for years. The very networks that once promised stability now seemed like traps, binding participants to risks they never fully understood. Financiers, sensing danger, retreated into caution. Lines of credit tightened overnight. Deals that had been negotiated in secret hours earlier were abruptly withdrawn. Information, once shared freely within trusted circles, became guarded. Even rumors moved differently, slower, heavier, as it weighed down by the fear of being entangled in another failure. The city began to feel the strain of a system collapsing inward on itself. Officials attempted to intervene, but found themselves grasping at shadows. With no formal records, no public agreements, and no transparent structure, they could not trace the origins of the crisis. Every question led to closed doors or vague answers. The hidden world resisted illumination, even as its collapse threatened the stability of London's visible economy. Frustration mounted within government halls. How could they mitigate risks they could not see? Tensions escalated further when rival networks began turning against one another. Accusations erupted. Claims that certain groups had withheld critical information, that some had profited from collapse, that others had fled obligations they were honor-bound to fulfill. Alliances fractured, old friendships dissolved beneath the weight of suspicion. The city, once unified by informal trust, now splintered into competing factions. The conflict reached a new height when several prominent financiers refused to honor obligations tied to the failed investment, insisting the agreements were never formalized. Merchants erupted in outrage. Even within the hidden circles, such a refusal was seen as breaking the unwritten code that made the networks function. If a promise spoken in confidence could be abandoned, then the entire system, built on nothing but reputation, was at risk of disintegration. Markets reacted violently. Prices swung unpredictably. Shipments stalled as merchants hesitated to proceed without reliable credit. Insurance underwriters demanded higher premiums to offset uncertainty. Every transaction felt like stepping onto unstable ground. Even those unconnected to the failed investment felt the tremors. The invisible networks had grown too wide, too intertwined, for any part of the city to remain untouched. Amid the chaos, one truth became impossible to ignore. The hidden maps had grown beyond human control. Their secrecy had become their weakness. London, a city built on the movement of capital, was now paralyzed by the very system that once made it powerful. And as pressure mounted from all sides, the stage was set for a reckoning. a moment when the shadows would be forced into the light, whether willingly or by collapse. The reckoning arrived when the crisis reached a point no hidden agreement could contain. A chain of defaults, quiet at first, then impossible to hide, pulled multiple networks into open conflict. For the first time, the invisible world that had guided London's commerce stepped unwillingly into public view. Markets froze, credit evaporated, and the city that once thrived on speed and secrecy now found itself paralyzed by both. The collapse exposed what officials, merchants, and financiers had long suspected but could never prove. The hidden maps had grown so vast and tangled that no one understood the full extent of their influence. A single failure could ripple outward, overturning fortunes that seemed far removed from the original mistake. The city was no longer navigating roads or rivers. It was stumbling through a labyrinth in the dark. In emergency meetings held behind locked doors, officials demanded transparency. They insisted the networks reveal their obligations, their partners, their buried risks. Many resisted, fearing exposure more than collapse. Others complied reluctantly, revealing webs of influence so dense they astonished even those who believed they knew the system intimately. Hundreds of quiet agreements, thousands of informal debts, countless promises scattered like sparks across the financial landscape. The climax came when a coalition of leading financiers, some disgraced, others desperate, admitted something unprecedented. They could not honor their commitments without immediate structural reform. The invisible routes that once gave London its agility had become liabilities too great for individuals or small groups to manage. The crisis had outgrown secrecy. It demanded architecture. In a moment that would reshape the city, officials, merchants, and financiers agreed to establish new forms of oversight, not to strangle innovation, but to anchor it. They created formal registries where obligations could be recorded. They introduced rules requiring disclosure of large risks. They developed systems to track credit, not through memory or whisper, but through documented, reviewable channels. The maps of money would no longer be hidden. They would be charted. As the dust settled, trust, slowly, cautiously, began to return. Not the blind trust that had fueled the hidden networks, but a sturdier, more deliberate kind, one grounded in accountability. One strengthened by the knowledge that even the most ambitious financial systems need structure to survive. London emerged from the crisis transformed. The shadows had not vanished, but they no longer ruled the city's destiny. Power shifted from private corridors to more transparent institutions. The unseen maps became frameworks. Their secret lines replaced by open routes that could be strengthened, studied, and repaired. What had once been a world of whispers became the foundation of modern financial navigation. Subscribe to join the journey.